Coming up tonight, we return to the USA. Once again, it's proven that man is no match for nature as it takes center stage. And we check out the sea views and the safari. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day 3 of the cruise view on board the Jewel of the Seas. Today, for September 20th, we once again had a port day, as we will almost every day this sailing. Today was the return to the United States with Astoria, Oregon, a port that is not found very often on cruise itineraries. Typically, they sail out of Seattle and Vancouver, and after Victoria, they head north to Alaska, or they leave out of places like San Francisco and Los Angeles and head south more. So it's not completely unusual to visit Astoria, but it is one of those rare ports that are around. And our weather today, we had a sunrise at 7 a.m. with a sunset at 7:21 p.m. And as for the conditions, we had a high of 67 degrees, and the forecast called for, just like every day so far, partly cloudy skies with an afternoon shower. And once again, just like every other day, that did not hold true. As we pulled in for the second day in a row now, we've had sprinkle of showers, some fog, haze going on as we entered the port today. And those conditions pretty much ended as soon as we actually docked. And we had a very beautiful day with nice warm conditions and sun out there until about 4 o'clock, and then the wind and rains came back and we had very foggy conditions that rolled in just in time to get ready to leave. But it was pretty clear for the most part right when we were leaving the port. While it was still raining, the fog cleared the port area, but as soon as we turned around and started heading out, everything was fogged in. You really couldn't see a whole lot as we departed the port and headed out of the Columbia River. But I'll get to that a little more in a moment. So today, our arrival was listed as 9:30 a.m. with a 10 a.m. gangway time. And this morning, as I woke up at 7:30 a.m., we were just crossing the Columbia River bar, so that was well ahead of schedule if we were to meet that same time schedule that was listed. And we ended up actually being docked by 8:30 a.m., a full hour ahead of the listed schedule dock time that was on the compass and published on Royal Caribbean's website as well. So most likely that was a result of the fact that this was the first time the ship was returning to the U.S., and the rest of our ports are in the U.S. And I don't know if it is a requirement for Alaska or if it is specific to this itinerary, but every passenger on board the ship did have to pass through U.S. Customs before the ship could be cleared and everybody could go ashore. And that was a requirement for everyone, whether they were going ashore today or not. You must go through Customs, and that will be the only time we go through Customs. Once we get to LA and get off the ship, there will not be any Customs involved at that point. So that's different than most cruises, and it sounds like it was something more unique to this one. It's certainly something that I'm sure doesn't happen very often in Astoria, places like that. So it was all done on board the ship, since our location in Astoria was a lumber yard, not really a place you could do custom checks or other port facilities that are typically found when you are leaving a ship and have to go through these processes. So in all of our rooms, we had a note telling us the time that we were supposed to go to actually take care of this. It was organized with all U.S. citizens going to the main dining room on deck number 5, and all non-U.S. citizens going to the Safari Club up on deck number 6. And it began with anyone that had a shore excursion scheduled today that you bought through Royal Caribbean that you had an actual ticket for. Your scheduled time was originally 8:45 that changed to about 9 o'clock to 9:30 was the official time announced this morning when the process began. And once they were through with the shore excursion guests, they moved on to the rest of the guests who did not have shore excursions, moving deck by deck, making ship-wide announcements of when they could come to the different areas in order to complete their customs check. And that was finally completed with the call for all remaining guests at 10:15 and a final announcement that the entire process was completed at 10:30 and a last call for anyone that had not shown yet, which was 45 minutes ahead of schedule, so it did go very smoothly time-wise. It was not without its hiccups, though. Right off the bat, they got to a rough start. All the people for shore excursions were told to line up, and that meant that what seemed like over half the guests were waiting in line for that time slot. So the line ended up leaving the main dining room on the port side and stretching through the Centrum past Cafe Latitudes, through the shops, through the art gallery, and ending all the way down by the theater. And that line most likely would have moved very quickly and been taken care of in a hurry, except the line really did not serve any purpose. They ultimately went through and called out different shore excursions and had people running along the line with 2 excursions each and pulling those people out of the line to take them directly to the dining room in order to go through the customs check. That really did not make a whole lot of sense, since you now had this long line through the whole ship of people waiting, and you're now bringing other people alongside of them, and that caused a little bit of chaos. It seems like things would have gone much smoother had they started with the idea of the excursions and had people assigned to different locations, different lounges throughout the ships based on those excursions, and then sent somebody to each location and pulled those individual groups as they were ready to handle them in the dining room. Because once we got to the dining room, it was clear things were slowly evolving. They were constantly learning and continuously trying to make the process smoother and quicker and more efficient, and it really did work well. Once you got to the main dining room, they're using a similar process to when they check you into your actual muster stations during the muster drill on the first day. They had the little scanner out, and they were scanning the backs of your cards to get you checked in, to know that you were there, as someone was actually collecting your customs paperwork. From there, you walked down the port side of the dining room to the back galley area and wrapped around, because deck 5 of the dining room is split on 2 separate sides. As you came out around on the other side, you then were met with the different customs agents, and an officer was directing people to the different customs officers, who then checked each of the passports, verified that everything was correct, and passed you on. And as you were getting ready to leave the dining room, there was then another person there that was punching holes in the card to identify that you had been through the customs check and that you were cleared to leave the ship when ready. From there, they then had somebody directing everybody outside to the lifeboat decks. Originally, they were trying to direct people through the shops, the same path that everybody was heading towards the dining room through, because once you left the main dining room, you then had to get back to the other end of the ship to the theater to meet up for your tours, which was where the end of the actual line was. So they were directing people out to the lifeboat decks, sending them down across the ship and back into the theater, which was a very smooth process. And overall, beyond that first initial hiccup with getting things rolling and understanding how the line was going to work to get people into the dining room, it really did go very fast, efficient, and it was very smoothly run today, which is a theme that we've seen across the board in the Jewel. Things have run very smoothly, things seem very well thought out, and they seem very quick to adjust and make changes to things when they are not working properly in order to try to make them as efficient as possible. This evening, our departure was then scheduled for 6 p.m., and as I mentioned before with the weather, we did have a lot of heavy fog around the ship and rain that cleared up just in time for the departure, but only around the actual pier area, so it was clear when we were pulling out and turning, but as soon as we got turned around to head out, we entered the fog again. You couldn't see a whole lot, and that continued all the way out to the sea as we passed a couple other ships on the way. And at about 7 p.m., as we crossed the Columbia River Bar, the seas really began to pick up with their roughness. You could feel a little bit of movement in the ship, but you could really see a lot of action out around the ship. And at about 7:30, once we were pretty far out into the clear ocean and actually had already made the turn to start heading south, the pilot boat, which was not the little dinghies or small boats we're used to seeing, it was a large Coast Guard looking boat that came out, arrived to finally pick up the pilot. I have been watching because a lot of times they do use a helicopter in Astoria to actually get the pilot off of the ship. It depends on the conditions. It's normally a helicopter because the seas are often rough in that area. But I guess today, with all the fog, the rain, the winds, even with the rough seas, the boat was the safer option. So they did bring the boat over, and it took them a little while to try and get things situated in a way that offered a nice, smooth area that they could bring the boat right up against the ship and get that pilot over onto there and safely back ashore where he needed to be. So it was an overall nice day in the port, an exciting one. And as for how I spent the day, moving on with our compass summary and my daily activities, my excursion for today was an official Royal Caribbean excursion. It was the historic Astoria and Fort Clatsop excursion that is offered. So as we left the ship, we boarded school buses that took us around Astoria to see various sites. The first stop was the Astoria Column, which is a large column that's located up on the top of the mountain. Normally you can walk inside and go up a spiral staircase to get an even higher view of the surrounding region and of Astoria. Unfortunately, it's currently under renovation, as it's been for the past several months, in order to refurbish it. So you could not go inside, but you still could get a nice view of the whole area from up there and look out at all of Astoria, as well as out in all directions at the wildlife and nature with the mountains and a large forest that spread in all directions. From there, second stop was at the Maritime Museum, which covered some of the history of the Coast Guard in Astoria and the Columbia River, as well as a lot of the shipwrecks and other disasters that have happened along the area, specifically at the Columbia River Bar, where those seas do tend to get very rough and are considered some of the roughest in the world. And following that, we then went to Fort Clatsop to see where Lewis and Clark made their first settlement on the west coast at the end of their journey before returning back to the east. But no excursion or activity on board the ship could really take the spotlight today from the wildlife that surrounded us. As soon as we pulled into Astoria, all around the ship were sea lions playing in the water. The entire day they continued to play all around the ship. Pretty much anytime you went on deck, on your balcony, you could just spot them swimming around alongside the ship. They were continuously diving under the water and out of the water in pairs, sometimes as many as 5 in a group, all around the ship. So they really seemed to steal the spotlight. Everyone was looking at them. And they weren't the first wildlife we saw today. Earlier this morning at about 7:15, I'm told, there were about 10 whales alongside the ship. Unfortunately, I was just before I woke up, so I did not get to see those at all. But those were the first wildlife. And then this evening, when we got ready to leave, the seagulls seemed to steal the spotlight. Not quite sure what they were after, but as we started to rotate the ship around, all of a sudden all these seagulls started swarming in at the water, right around where the thrusters were stirring things up, and pretty much swarmed the entire area right there. All you could hear was the sound of the seagulls and see them just flying everywhere and just covering the water. So that was a pretty incredible sight to see and something a little surprising for seagulls to actually be interesting for once. And then for our dining for today, we actually have two. The first one on board the Jewel of the Seas. She is the last ship in the fleet to still have a Seaview Cafe. Most of the other ones have been converted over to a park cafe already, but she has not undergone her waist sizing, so it is still on board. And I went there for lunch today, got their Cuban, a sandwich I've often gotten from the park cafe. And seeing as the park cafe is the evolution of the Seaview Cafe, I expected it to be a very similar meal. Surprisingly, it was very different, where the park cafe really does paninis and presses things. In the Seaview Cafe, it was more like a hoagie or a sub roll that they made the Cuban out of. It was still a very good meal. The onion rings that they make there were delicious. Pretty much all the food there looked fresh and very good. And compared to the park cafe, where it's kind of a quick service, you go up to the counter and order your food, here you get seated and you wait around for your food. It really felt more like Johnny Rockets than the park cafe or any other complimentary venue on board a Royal Caribbean ship. And it had a very nice atmosphere to it, but I'm sure today was a port day. A lot of people were ashore, and yet every table inside was full. So I'm sure on those sea days it's going to be packed, and that's probably why they are removing it, because I doubt they can really keep up with the demand considering the quality of what they are offering there. And then for dinner tonight, the menu was the basil menu, one that I've often considered one of the better ones out of them. This is a menu where I usually don't order an appetizer, but there are two entrees I usually get. I usually get the orschietta pasta, which features a short rib ragu, and oftentimes you get some pieces of meat or something on it. This time it was a very shredded meat. It was very good. You could mix it in with the pasta, and it was very well made, in my opinion, one of the better versions of it that I have received on the ships. Second entree that I got was the chicken cordon bleu, another one of my favorite meals that I often get on land as well as on sea every time. And with the new menus, they've been putting in a bone along with the chicken cordon bleu. So once they make it up, they just stick a bone in there kind of for appearances. I personally don't like the bone. I think it makes it look a little bit sloppy, and when you take the bone apart, it really kind of makes the whole thing fall apart. Today there was no bone, and the quality of the meat was top-notch all the way through, so it was another very good dish today. Really, both of them were incredible, some of the best that I've had of these from other ships. But moving on from the food, after dinner all the activities really started on board because we were back at sea, everyone was done eating, and that meant it was time to sit around and watch some entertainment. And that started at 7:30 with the welcome back party for Crown and Anchor members. It was a fairly traditional event once again. All the officers were waiting at the doors to greet everyone as they entered, served drinks like they always do. And once again, Dennis really took charge of the event, went through a nice little greeting, some extra information about Royal Caribbean and Crown and Anchor as a whole. And then the loyalty manager came out to go over some stats, as they often do. And on this particular sailing, 3/4 of the passengers are Crown and Anchor members, but we've also set a new record. On this sailing, there are 51 Pinnacle members, which is the highest any single sailing has ever had before for any ship in the fleet, not just the Jewel of the Seas side, as a new Royal Caribbean record as a whole. And that event took place in the Safari Club, which is the venue I'm going to talk a little bit more about today. That is the venue that has hosted several events in the evenings. At about 10 o'clock, there's often a game show or some kind of event happening in this lounge. And it's very similar to what became the Cleopatra's Needle on the Voyager class ships, as well as the old Starlight Lounge and other lounges on the Vision class ships at the very back of the ship, right after the schooner bar, in the same location basically as it is here on the Radiance class. The one major difference though is the quality of the theming. This venue is incredible to look at. It looks like an old ocean liner. Everything is so detailed. Everything looks like wood. It's got beautiful color schemes. It is an absolutely incredible venue to just look at aesthetically. And it is a large venue seating 320 people with a lot of different space, including an entire room dedicated to just playing cards and having a large table in there to gather and meet people. All along the back wall, they also have different tables set up for things like chess and other games. Connected to the Safari Club at the entrance between the Schooner Bar and the Safari Club is the Game Reserve, which features 2 TVs with sitting areas, one of which I'm sitting in at the moment, as well as 2 self-leveling pool tables to keep the tables completely flat so nothing moves around regardless of the sea conditions, especially if you hit some rougher seas. And that is something that is unique to the Radiance class that was reintroduced with the Quantum of the Seas and Music Hall as well. And that is not the only similarity to the Quantum of the Seas. While this venue is a club kind of on the ship, not a nightclub, but a club to hold games and activities in, it is also a lounge with a bar and a lot of seating and games. Something that is very similar to another venue on the Quantum of the Seas. And earlier today and yesterday as I've walked around, I've often seen people sitting in here reading books. There are large windows all around the back of the ship, and a lot of people found places to basically sit and watch the ocean and relax. And as I looked at that and looked at the games, I thought it would be kind of cool to have a venue like this in the back of the ship, that it basically felt like a Viking Crown lounge that was facing the back of the ship, which I realized was 270. Exactly what 270 is, a Viking Crown lounge in the back of the ship that allows you to see out the back of the ship, a nice place to sit and relax and read a book throughout the day, a place to hold events and gatherings. And really, this is a single floor 270, it feels like it, and it is incredibly themed. In my opinion, it's the first thing I've seen on a ship in the fleet beyond the Quantum that feels like it is actually themed at the level that the Quantum of the Seas was delivered at. It is incredible, the level of detail in here. The only negative I can find with it is that it may actually be too detailed, that they may have actually put too much thought into the aesthetics, and they put in some extra lamps that are giant posts with light at the top that don't add any structural stability. They don't have any actual integrity to them. They don't connect to the ceiling. They're simply posts there with a light on the top, and they end up blocking some of the views in the venue, which when you look at the theater where there are almost no posts, they've done an incredible job making sure that every seat has a perfect view of the entire stage. It's a little odd that they added these extra posts that aren't needed when they could put a low light in there in order to get that same lighting effect, but they obviously chose to go for the environment and the appearance of the venue, and in that regard they certainly did succeed. And moving along with the compass after that welcome back party was then the first production show of the sailing, and tonight it was West End to Broadway. A very similar show to some of the ones we saw in the Grandeur. It's not a Broadway play, it's not really a story, it's simply a collection of different songs that are parts of other plays that are on either the West End in London or Broadway in New York City.
Get out your ice and your tap shoes and tails. Let's go backwards when forward fails.
And these are often, just like with any performance, hit or miss. If you like the songs, you'll like the performance. If you don't like the songs, you probably won't. I thought they did a great job. It was a very good cast that actually seemed rather small compared to what I remember some of the other ships having, and they had a lot of costume changes, so there was definitely a cast that had their work cut out for them today, getting through all these costume changes to get through that performance that was really rapid fire, going through all the songs. And one of the nice things they had that I think is probably a side effect of all the digital signage we've had, they had outside the theater the old boards with the nice paper sign of who's performing tonight, and alongside it today they actually had a listing of all the different songs for the entire performance, the complete set list in order, so you knew what songs were being performed, as well as the entire cast of singers and dancers, so you could see who all these people are that are putting this performance on for you. That's something I don't know if they've done in the past, because it's been so long since I've seen a ship with that, because even the Freedom class that I went on back in 2007, while it didn't have what we consider digital signage today, the shows were digital screens that simply showed a poster. So it's been a while since I've been on a ship that actually did not have that digital signage. So this could be the way it's always been on the older ships, but it's certainly something that jumped out as being a nice feature that the new ships are lacking. We see it a little bit on the Quantum of the Seas, and I'm sure it's also on the Oasis and the other ships, where while you're waiting for the Broadway shows up on the screens to go through the cast and give you brief bios, which are a little more detailed, this is a nice little compromise to it, not as much detail, but still providing a lot of information. So it'd be nice if they brought this to the digital signage. They're already digital screens. It shouldn't be too hard if they were to put another slide, rotate it through with the poster, maybe even make a nice animation where it flips the poster around, shows the current posters, and then gives this kind of detail to it on the back side of it. And they did that production show twice. I went to the 8:30 one for the first seating. They repeated it right afterwards at 10 o'clock for the second seating. And then following that at 11 o'clock, once again in the Coral Theater, was one of the more popular game shows of any sailing, typically. And that was the Love and Marriage Game Show, a classic that is on almost every single sailing and is always an entertaining show. Once again, it was done in the traditional fashion where Daniel, the activities manager, came out and picked our three couples for the show. One newlywed, one that's been married a long time, and one that's somewhere in the middle. And then introduced Dennis to come out and host the whole show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Love and Marriage Game Show. And now please welcome to the stage your host, the cruise director, Dennis!
One without the other. Well, thank you for staying up. Nice to see you. Everybody give a nice round of applause for Daniel and Kat over here for getting us started tonight. We've got three couples. They love you, Dan. All right. We've got...
First, the women leave and the men answer questions. The women come back, find out if the answers match, and then repeat it the opposite. And as Dennis has all sailing long, he once again shined tonight with a real classic feel to him, really reminiscent of the old show as it was, where a lot of cruise directors kind of come out and they host the show, or really they host the whole cruise. Dennis has continuously been a true entertainer with performances and really a complete package of entertainment, not just a hosting duty. And while it was a good show, unfortunately, not many people came out. This is a show that is always crowded. Almost always the theater is full. On more than one occasion, the theater's been standing room only when I've attended this show. It was at 11 o'clock, which could be a little bit later. It could be a lot of Crown and Anchor members are tired of the show being on every ship. I personally find it to be one of the things that I enjoy. It's one of the traditions I see every sailing. But from my rough count, it seemed like less than 100 people came out to the show. So that is really low numbers for a show like the Love and Marriage Game Show, and hopefully it's not a sign of what's to come with The Quest, which is probably the most popular show in the entire Royal Caribbean selection of shows that they put on each sailing, and one that really can't function if you do not have a large enough crowd. So that basically ended the night, and once it ended, I walked around the ship. It actually is completely empty. It wasn't that people were at other events. There really was nobody else around this whole ship once that did let out at roughly midnight. It actually ended. And that does lead us to tomorrow then. Tomorrow is our first and only day at sea for this sailing, which you would think would leave more people willing to stay up later for the Love and Marriage Game Show, but it doesn't seem to have worked out that way. But it does start early with the Captain's Corner tomorrow and a whole selection of other items. So be sure to tune back tomorrow to see what goes on with our first and only day at sea, and also be looking a little more at the Jewel of the Seas and our experience so far on this class of ship. So come back tomorrow.